Hello everybody, I've got a wonderful 1890s S.S. Stewart banjo here. This model is called the Universal Favorite. This is a Universal Favorite #1. I do believe I've seen advertisements for a #2 and a #3, and they have fancier inlay and stuff like that. But this is a #1. This is still sort of, you know, upper mid-range banjo for the time, I'd say. This was not a cheap banjo back then. This was $20 in the 1890s, which is, you know, that might be 2 months' pay for somebody back in those days. You know, that was a fair amount of money. Let's see if you can see the markings in there. The hide is stamped by Mr. John Balch. This is a premium hide from John Balch. He mounts these hides and sells them and does a nice job. If you're interested in something like that, I would recommend you look into getting something like that from him. That saves you a lot of the trouble. You don't have to mount the hide yourself like I did in a recent video, which is kind of a lot of work. So you just buy the hide and you slap it on like a plastic hide, but you get a premium goat hide from him. This is a very nice hide. And he goes through them and hand selects them, you know, for even thickness and no holes in them and nothing like that. And as you can see, it's not bleached, so I like that. Nice classic looking hide. Another interesting thing that's on this banjo, check out the heel wedge there. That single ebony wedge. Usually this is 2 wedges. I've never seen, this is how it has that solid bar across the top. I've never seen that before. That's the first time I've ever seen it. And it works, seems to work nicely, and it's real nice. Real elegant, plain looking, I like that. And you can see it's just got plain diamond inlay that you would typical of a Stewart banjo, and the star on the peg head there. These tuners are not the original tuners, of course. These are some, I don't know what brand they are, but they're some nice sort of modern geared tuners with nice faux ivory buttons on them. This is an old 1890s or whatever, turn of the century 5th peg tuner here. Originally this would have had the standard violin friction pegs on it. Yeah, got all the original hooks on it. Not the original tailpiece, of course, but it works, old-timey tailpiece. And this is sort of an unusual bridge for me. This is the first time I've ever used a bridge like this. This bridge was made by a guy named Stephen Arms, who builds banjos too. And I bought some of these bridges from him. He calls it a spillway bridge because it kind of looks like it's got spillways underneath it, culverts or whatever. I've heard other people, I know a guy named Lindsay up in Brasstown, North Carolina. He makes nice bridges like this, similar, and he calls that a continuous leg bridge. Because you can see it's just got one solid leg across the bottom. So I think it sounds very nice with these nylon strings. Sounds great on this banjo, so I'm going to keep it this way. You know, one thing I've been talking to Jerron Paxton lately, and you guys, a lot of y'all, I'm sure you know who Jerron is. A great guitar player, banjo player, fiddler, harmonica player. You know, a real jack of all trades. Great guy. And he's lately, I think, he's gotten really into classic banjo. So he's doing that real intricate 3-finger picking, and he's into different types of banjos, and he's into the setup and stuff. So I was talking to him about this banjo and just classic banjo in general. And he explained something to me that I'd not heard before. He told me that, and I think he's correct, that with nylon strings they sound much better on what you call an uncapped bridge, a one-piece bridge. Like you see, this bridge is just one piece of walnut, just solid walnut. Most modern bridges that we all use today, they're usually maple on the bottom with an ebony cap on the top. But Jerron mentioned to me that they don't sound as good with nylon strings. Like he thinks that those strings or those bridges, those capped, ebony capped bridges, are basically, you know, made only with steel strings in mind. And I had never really considered that before. And you know, I've got a whole, you know, box full of bridges, so I started fishing around and stuff and trying them out. You know, he's right. A solid wood bridge sounds much better on nylon strings, and a capped bridge sounds better on steel strings. So a free tip from us there is something to think about. So when I went to set this thing up, I wanted to try one of these spillway bridges, because to be honest with you, me personally, I didn't really care for the way a spillway bridge sounds on regular steel string banjo. But when I put nylons on this sucker, and it's a solid uncapped spillway bridge, sounds great. Gold dollars done and gone. Oh, my last gold dollars done and gone. Well, my board bill's due, my whiskey bill too, and my last gold dollars done and gone. Anyhow, just a real nice banjo. A couple more details I'll throw out there. It's a cherry neck. These all came with cherry necks, and there's sort of an interesting repair here on the tip. I thought it was interesting. They took it must have cracked. You can see they did a nice job. It's hard to see, but y'all can probably see right there. See just on the tip there, it must have cracked here at the tip, which is common with these old banjos. You know, Joel Hooks, another classic banjo guy, he was telling me he thinks that's because of the old cases that they used back then. Those old cases in those days were sort of these flimsy cloth cardboard cases, and the banjos slid in from the back, like a pistol in a holster. It slid in. It didn't open on the side. And he was telling me that he thinks that accounts for a lot of the damage you see to the tips of these things, which there may be something to that. But so, as usual, there's some damage to the tip of this one, but it was finally repaired. They just put a piece of ebony here, and then they plugged it on the front there, you can see. Yeah, really nice banjo. And check out the grain that's inside the rim. I think that's a faux grain, but you know, I don't know. I read in the advertisement that the rims for these banjos were maple, but that don't look like maple to me, unless it's maple with some kind of a faux figuring painted onto it. Really neat. And I've mentioned too, one last thing I'll say, you see how it's got hex bolts in it? That's an indicator of a higher end banjo. If you see most of these old banjos that just have the slotted dome-shaped screw heads, that's sort of cheaper. When you get into these hex bolts, that indicates that it was a more expensive instrument. Okay, everybody, that's all I want to show you on this 1890s S.S. Stewart Universal Favorite, #1. And yeah, thanks for looking.